Welcome, everyone, to the Information's TITV. My name is Stephanie Palazzolo, and it's Monday, August 3rd. First up, the Information has exclusive reporting that the Trump administration has invited staffers from major tech companies to the White House on Tuesday to finalize its AI oversight framework. We'll discuss that news along with another exclusive report about OpenAI's plans to release a new model family, tentatively dubbed Astra. I'll also be joined by our Apple reporter to discuss his story on how an Apple cloud policy led former employees to accidentally take confidential information with them. And we'll wrap the show with a great story from our crypto reporter about Robinhood's new place in the prediction markets. It's going to be a great show, so let's get right on into it. The Information exclusively reported this morning that the Trump administration is inviting staffers from major tech companies like OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic to the White House on Tuesday to review the final version of an AI oversight framework, which will lay out how AI labs will share their models with the government before releasing them publicly. The meeting comes shortly after OpenAI CEO Sam Altman traveled to DC to preview a new model called Astra with policymakers. My colleagues Leo Schwartz and Erin join me now to talk more about both of these stories. Welcome to the show, Erin and Leo.
Yeah.
So, Leo, this voluntary framework has been a long time coming. We're going to talk about it a bit more later on in the show with another guest, but what were the big questions that were really holding up the process?
Yeah, we've been reporting on this for weeks now, ever since that early June executive order from the Trump administration set out this idea for a voluntary system where companies could come in and share their models with the government before releasing them to the public and to trusted partners. What had to be done when after that order came out in early June was the 60-day period where they actually defined what is a frontier model, what's the benchmarks for which a model will have to meet to go through this system, and then also what does the process actually look like for review? They say it's voluntary, so they had to actually create the different mechanisms through which a company will come to the government and submit it either to Casey, which is the small testing agency within Commerce, or to the NSA or to other agencies to make sure that they can actually release to the public. It seems like tomorrow companies will finally get an understanding of what this process will look like.
Yeah, a lot of really tough questions. And, this briefing is coming pretty soon after Sam Altman traveled to DC to preview a new model to policymakers. I mean, do we know anything about kind of why Sam wanted to go on this trip and what he was hoping to get out of it?
Yeah, I think it's no surprise that Sam was in DC last week, obviously, right before this framework comes in. As I reported with my two great co reporters here last Friday, he showed this new model, which is tentatively called Astra, with the idea that it would be the first OpenAI model to actually go through the framework with the government. Of course, OpenAI has been interfacing with the government and submitting its models for testing for a long time now. But in the wake of when the executive order came out in early June, there's been this period of chaos or uncertainty over how companies should actually interact with the government. Of course, that culminated with the government putting export controls on Anthropic over its new models and then ordering OpenAI to do a staggered release of its latest model, GPT 5.6. So it seems like one of the reasons Sam was in town was to show off this model and really fight for the final language that would go into this framework, with the idea being that this will be the first OpenAI model to actually go through it.
Great. So, speaking of this new model, which, as Leo just mentioned, we reported last week is going to be called Astra potentially. Erin, what do we know about it? What exactly, makes it different from older OpenAI models?
Yeah, so OpenAI is planning to release this new model called Astra. It'll be a new model family. So that means that it's like a new class of model to go alongside the three classes of models that they've already announced: Sol, Terra, and Luna. And what OpenAI is saying about this one is that it's especially good for performing long running tasks. So they demonstrated its agent capabilities and its ability to have multiple agents or teams of agents working together to solve particularly hard problems.
Why is it important for, models to be able to work for long
Yeah.
periods of time or to have these kind of swarms of agents?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can think about this just in terms of for you, like, you want an agent to be able to, like, work for a long time, like, you don't wanna have to keep checking in and, like, telling it what to do, and then it also turns out that this ability to, like, keep trying things is really important for example, cybersecurity applications, where a lot of the ways to successfully hack something, as we learned with Mythos, turns out to be just continuing trying. So, like, previous agents would kind of hit a dead end and it would give up, but then these newer classes of models, these more advanced classes of models, will basically just keep trying things and doing different things and, like, stringing together different attacks until they're able to find a weak point.
Gotcha. And has OpenAI shared anything about, early results from Astra or any breakthroughs they've been able to have with the new models?
Yeah, so over the weekend, they released a report showing that Astra was able to solve 10 previously unsolved math problems. And so it's a really good sign for its ability to help with AI research, scientific progress, etc.
Gotcha. So it sounds like lots of really interesting applications across cyber, math, scientific discovery, all areas that I think people have been super excited about. So thanks so much again. That's Erin Wu, who covers OpenAI and Google, and Leo Schwartz, our AI and politics reporter here at The Information. Apple prides itself on privacy, but its recent lawsuit against OpenAI calls that reputation into question with former employees. My colleague Aaron Tilley wrote more about this in his latest piece, and he joins us now to chat about it. Welcome to the show, Aaron.
Thanks for having me.
So, what exactly did you find out from the former Apple employees that you chatted with?
Yeah, so Apple has a peculiar problem in regards to how employees retain information after they leave the company. So when an employee joins Apple, they have a iCloud, work iCloud set up and Apple pays for. And Apple encourages employees to use their personal pre-existing iCloud account. And that's how they share documents and various Apple software. And what ends up happening is because it's shared with your personal account, a lot of employees end up with retaining access to ongoing live documents that are being shared. So you leave the company, you still have this document shared, and you can see updates of new edits or some sort of new person being shared of the document. So for a company that's obsessed with secrecy, this is a very strange issue that's happening.
Yeah, I think as you just mentioned, this seems very weird for Apple, right? This is a company that their whole thing is privacy and keeping things safe. Well, like why would they even allow this to happen? Or is this something that's just falling through the cracks? What's kind of going on here behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think it's just it's a matter of like Apple doesn't have the most modern, robust sort of internal IT security practices. I think for a lot of companies, they maintain a very strict segregation between your personal and work life. And with Apple, it's all sort of mixed together because the devices they give their users are just the regular devices and services that consumers have. So it's like a personal computer that they're using for work. So it's just a lot more mixing and mashing of your personal and your work life. So I think that's an issue. And a lot of companies are using they're embracing modern tools that make it much easier to sort of cut off access to work documents after a person leaves. And Apple just doesn't use those tools as robustly as a lot of other companies.
And, what sorts of documents and files were employees able to have access to even after leaving the company? Were these, top secret internal files? Like how bad was it that they still had access to these sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, I heard from a number of folks, it was everything from, unreleased products to sort of like internal technology, for very protective IP kind of information that employees would end up retaining because of this practice. So it was certainly, stuff that Apple would want to keep secret.
Gotcha. So sounds like not great, but not necessarily their fault because of the fact that this was due to this kind of unusual policy that Apple has. Does this, affect the Apple lawsuit against OpenAI at all? Is this going to play a factor in it?
Yeah, so the lawsuit against OpenAI, Apple claimed they told me it has nothing to do with this iCloud sharing issue. The interesting thing is that I've heard from some instances these OpenAI employees have received threatening letters from Apple regarding this exact issue over retaining iCloud information in their personal iClouds. So it's something that Apple claims is not part of it, but it definitely is being used. It seems like to send threatening legal letters to these people. So we'll see how it plays out. In the case against OpenAI, they have other things they allege, like an employee, Tang Tan, who's the chief hardware officer at OpenAI, emailing himself documents. So that certainly does not fall. That's a very intentional act of keep retaining documents if it's true, the allegations. But this is just it certainly exists among a large set of these OpenAI employees that this practice happened.
Mm. And beyond this issue that we're talking about now, talk to me a bit about how Apple kind of maintains its security for internal employees, more broadly, especially in its supply chain, which is obviously very important for it to, make sure that information doesn't leak out to competitors, for instance.
Yeah, that's a huge security focus for them. In the 2010s, they really took a stab at cracking down on that. The executives were very upset around leaks of live unreleased products, unreleased iPhones. That was all coming out of the supply chain. So they really took extreme efforts to sort of lock down the physical side of security. So preventing any of these contractors, any of these employees throughout China from taking these devices or unreleased products out of the factories. And they really tamped down on that. And it was a huge success. I mean, I was told it got down to zero physical leaks. So the next side was on the digital. So Apple put extensive sort of security requirements in the supply chain on how digital documents could be sent out and how they crack down on that. No USB drives, very strict control over access around what images can be taken and how that can be sent out. So it's they take it's very seriously in supply chain. It just in terms of US employees, some of these practices, I mean, it's just unpractical to require you know, everyday employees in Cupertino to maintain some of these security practices that they exercise in their supply chain. So it's not as stringent in Cupertino where they're located.
Totally. And, obviously we were talking a lot about the current ongoing Apple OpenAI lawsuit that's going on, but this isn't the first time that Apple has really gone after former employees or employees that have joined competitors. What has happened in the past with Apple going after these sort of poached employees? Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, they do not like concerted efforts to go after Apple employees. There were two notable cases in the past where Apple really tried to lock that down. In 2019, Nuvia, a chip company that they sued, and in 2022, Rebos, another chip company they sued. In the case of Nuvia, they accused one of the founders, Gerard Williams, of breaching his employment contract. So they were able to use a lot of internal documents from his communications to go after him. In the case of Rebos, they made very similar accusations that they made against OpenAI about alleged IP theft, taking documents, and iCloud played prominently in the Revos case. A lot of the allegations against former employees taking documents was over this sort of like iCloud syncing issue I explained in the article. And Apple described it, they portrayed it as very intentional that these employees were trying to steal information. And a lot of cases, this is just automated sort of iCloud backups that these documents are being shared. So yeah, this was from what I can tell. I mean, it appears like Apple was trying to stem the tide of employees leaving, and it worked. After these lawsuits were filed, Apple employees were terrified of talking to these companies because they were afraid of being named in these lawsuits. It can be, pretty horrific. It can end your career being sort of like accused of being a thief by Apple. So yeah, it's not worth the risk once one of these lawsuits are filed. You don't want to be named.
Mm. Sounds like it's a tough position to be in, to be a former Apple employee that's maybe getting poached by a competitor. Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Aaron. Again, that's Aaron Tilley, our Apple reporter here at The Information. As we first reported this morning, the Trump administration will be previewing tomorrow with the AI Labs its new framework for how AI developers will share models with the government for testing before release. To talk more about this voluntary framework and other recent regulatory moves from the Trump administration, we have Divyansh Kaushik, Vice President at DC based strategic advisory firm Beacon Global Strategies. Welcome, Divyansh.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, my colleague Leo talked a little bit about this earlier, but to recap, what's kind of the point here of this voluntary framework that the Trump administration is working on with these different industry AI labs?
Yeah. So, as you know, the White House issued this AI executive order saying that if you are developing models that, in their view, should be covered models for testing by the government, here's a voluntary framework through which you will be able to share those models with the government agencies, including the Center for AI Standards and Innovation at NIST, at Commerce, the National Security Agency, for doing safety and security testing, as well as like what a trusted access program should look like. Right now, these things are happening, but they're happening on a more ad hoc basis. So this is a more streamlined version, or like an attempt to develop a more streamlined version by the White House to get these models out to cyber defenders, make sure that the safeguards are right and that they exist, that models are being tested, but while keeping it in a voluntary framework. So, like, no company is compelled to do this, but hey, if you want to do this, here's how you could work with the government.
Mhm. So it sounds like a bit more of a structured version of something that is happening on an ad hoc basis.
Right. Like, rather than calling, person X or person Y at the White House and asking, hey, can I give my model to this entity or that entity, and receiving intelligence checks on them about their ties to China or whatnot. This is a more structured framework that, hey, how do we think about this? How do we think about trusted access programs broadly? Right now, you've got Project Glasswing that Anthropic has. You've got OpenAI has its own. Right. And obviously, there will be more labs and more companies that will develop models that will have similar cyber capabilities. In fact, like, cyber is the threat vector people are focused on right now. There will be more. Fire will be coming down the line. There will be unanticipated threat vectors. And so this is the government's thought process on, okay, how do we try to streamline this? Because right now, I mean, everybody will agree that defenders are not able to get the models fast enough.
Mhm. Definitely. And this is something that we've written about a little bit, but it seems like one of the hardest things for folks to really, wrestle with as they're coming up with this framework is what exactly is a covered frontier model? What exactly is the definition of a model that's going to be included in this framework as something that has to be tested first? So obviously, we don't know exactly what's going to be in the framework, but talk to me. What do you know anything about different definitions that were maybe being thrown around? What might make sense? What might not make sense? Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, I think, simply speaking, it's a really hard question to think about, like, what should be a covered model without, because it's a catch-22 problem, right? You're trying to say, uh, we want to determine whether your model should be covered for this kind of testing, but how do you determine that without actually testing the model? Uh, and so one of the ways that people can assess that is based on benchmark results. On whether a model is, say, better than Mythos or Fable or GPT-5.5 on certain tasks. And then the government can engage in their internal testing. Now, there are arguments to be made. Some people have made an argument that, okay, well, it should not be the best model coming out of a lab. It should not be a step change over there. What it should be is the best model out in industry, right? So if, say, company X develops a new model that is a step change in their capabilities, but it's still below, say, the best model that is out there that's from some other company, that this model should not be tested. I think that's perhaps not the right way to think about this, because every model will have different safeguards, different capabilities. Like, yes, on certain benchmarks, the numbers will speak something else. But at the end of the day, when there is a step change in capabilities internally at a company, I think that should determine your covered model definition. But that's just my personal view. I think there are a lot of conversations that have happened within the administration on this particular topic over the last several months. And I think we'll see a lot more tomorrow on where we are going to end up. And just like one other thing that is not clear here is, how do you make sure that this is not creating more burden for the industry, but actually streamlining this? Because does this definition also apply to open weight models, right? And if it does, how do you make sure that it is actually being implemented in a more streamlined manner, so as to make sure that our open weight models can come out at the same pace as, say, the Chinese models are coming out? Because the Chinese companies are not going to sign on to any of the frameworks that the White House has. They're not going to send their models to the National Security Agency to be tested.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to kind of overly burden, U.S. open weight models, for instance, putting us behind China. Speaking of, I think open weight, open source is a very big question. How to, test and regulate these sorts of models. How do you think the voluntary framework might deal with the question of open weight or open source models?
I don't know. I think it is a very difficult question to address, and I don't envy people who have to make those decisions. I don't think there are good answers here.
So part of the issue, it sounds like, is the fact that with open source, right, if you can download the model onto your device, your laptop, some of these models are small enough to do that. It's very hard for the government to, control what people are doing with those models. So I know some people have thrown around the idea of going after cloud providers or inference providers, kind of the companies that are maybe providing those open source models to people. But it does seem like a very difficult question that doesn't have an easy answer, to your point.
Exactly. And then, that's one thing. The other thing is just like, what do you even define as a safeguard, right? If you're saying that all of these models should have a reasonable baseline of safeguards, how do you define that? That is unclear right now. So what is the standard that you're trying to hold open weight models to? If your entire argument is, oh no, say if a hyperscaler wants to deploy a model, it should get it tested. Okay, but what's next? Say during the tests, say KCR, NSA identifies certain issues. What's next? I don't think people have thought about that yet.
Definitely true. And then kind of the last thing I was curious to get your thoughts on, there have been other big announcements from the Trump administration as of late. I think one that a lot of people are talking about is this somewhat controversial ban on imports of new foreign-made humanoid robots, which, mostly come from China, and they're citing kind of national security concerns. What's kind of the reasoning behind this ban, and do you think people are misunderstanding anything about it?
Yeah, I think so. What you're talking about is the FCC adding advanced robotics, foreign-produced advanced robotics to the covered list, and that was after an interagency determination that foreign-produced robots pose a national security risk. So I think one of the things that we have to think about here is how the FCC has defined this. There are reasonable arguments you can have on whether, say, like your home robo vacuums should be covered or not. But I think nobody can say that Unitree, a company that has deep ties to the People's Liberation Army and in whose quadrupeds and humanoids security researchers have been able to identify so many vulnerabilities over the last year that the company still hasn't patched. Where even without the security vulnerabilities, that their humanoids record audios, record all video, and send it all back to China. I think people can agree that that poses a lot of risks, and in particular when those are being used and by police departments, by in prisons and for corporate tourism and whatnot. Like that ends up posing different kind of risks. One security researcher was able to just like take over 1,900 or something Unitree robots with one backdoor in the United States, right? So the administration is saying like, hey, if you propose a plan to onshore production of these advanced robots, the Pentagon can put you on a whitelist, basically allow you to continue selling next generation of your robots in the United States. Now, it's up to the Chinese companies whether they want to propose such a plan or not. I don't think that they will. But simultaneously, a lot of people did freak out that, oh, we will lose access to the best robots for research. That is not true. They can continue to buy the current generation of Unitree, HBot, whatever. And even the next generations that are banned by the FCC order now, they can buy up to 4,000 of each generation, each model. I can buy up to 4,000. You can buy up to 4,000. And just look at Unitree's own numbers. Their IPO says that they sold roughly 5,000 humanoids total. So this is not like China's blanketing itself with Unitree humanoids. 4,000 of each generation is a huge number that you can purchase. So I think the research community should not feel unsafe that, oh, we have lost access to the best hardware.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like, in your opinion, perhaps some of the outrage that we heard was perhaps a little overblown.
Yeah, I think I won't blame the people because they're not following the law as closely, but that this is the case, and I think Carnegie Mellon can still buy up to 4,000 of next generation of Unitree, HBot, whatever, or Stanford can, Cornell can,
Gotcha.
as long as it is for pre-commercial R&D. Just do not do commercial stuff with it.
Yes, exactly. Well, sounds like a lot of exciting news in the world of AI regulation coming out this week. Again, thank you so much for coming on, Divyansh. That is Divyansh Kaushik, Vice President at Beacon Global Strategies. Robinhood's foray into prediction markets is changing things up for the company. The Information's crypto reporter Yueqi Yang wrote about this for our Sunday Insights column. Yueqi joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Steph.
So Robinhood has only really been in the prediction market business for less than 2 years, but as you wrote about this weekend, we're really starting to see a big impact on the company's revenue. How did that kind of shake out in the most recent quarter?
Yeah, so for the first time ever, prediction markets revenue at Robinhood has surpassed the revenue that Robinhood makes from either equities trading or crypto trading. And it really shows that within just such a short time frame of less than 2 years, prediction market has become such a dominant force for users at Robinhood. And in the most recent quarter, the second quarter, Robinhood made over $150 million in revenue from prediction markets. That's 10 times what they made a year ago. And it also means that prediction market now makes up 20% of the trading revenue at Robinhood.
So it sounds like both the predictions revenue is growing super quickly, but also in comparison to some of these other businesses, like you mentioned, it's even surpassing things like stocks and crypto trading revenue for Robinhood, which is pretty crazy. How sustainable do you think this is? Is this maybe more dependent on these big events that have been happening recently, like elections or obviously the World Cup over the summer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think prediction market revenues are highly volatile because of these big events. Like World Cup helped a lot with all these prediction markets for their June and mid-July trading volume. But World Cup is only once every 4 years. And then I think if you look at the July trading volume for some of these platforms, their volume has already dropped comparing to June. So we'll see. There are more events coming up later in the year as well. NFL is coming up, midterm elections coming up. So there are all these seasonality for the numbers, just given how frequently big events happen.
Mhm. So based on that, do you think this is gonna be kind of a fundamentally different shift for Robinhood into this new business and a much bigger focus on it? Or is this kind of just a new trend for them that might die away in a couple years?
Yeah, I think Robinhood is really doing a great job capturing whatever the latest interest their core audience has. And their core audience is this group of retail traders who are very much into betting, into gambling, and it reflects in their business as well. Because during the pandemic, Robinhood really rose to fame by providing stock trading and option tradings. And then after that, crypto became a big business for Robinhood. Like Dogecoin trading at one point was a pretty big deal for people using Robinhood. And now crypto has kind of faded away. The crypto revenue was down this quarter from a year ago. But then at the same time, prediction market became the perfect replacement of crypto because it allows people to trade and then potentially make fast money just betting on anything from what's the weather going to be tomorrow to what's the next World Cup games outcomes going to be in the next hour or so.
So in the piece, you do talk about some of the other big prediction markets players, companies like Polymarket and Kalshi, which is the biggest. So, Kalshi's still the leader here, but Robinhood clearly has a big distribution advantage. Do you think Robinhood could overtake Kalshi at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think that's a great question too. For now, Kalshi is still pretty dominant in the US market, and Robinhood is a smaller player. And I think for these people who trade on prediction market, they also need to look at the pricing differences. And currently, Robinhood still sends some part of the orders to Kalshi, which means that they charge a fee in addition to what Kalshi already charges the user for. So we'll see how these pricing dynamics play out, and whether for users, if it will be cheaper to just go directly onto Kalshi to trade, or if they will prefer to stay on a platform that they already use, such as Robinhood, to trade on prediction markets.
Mhm. And I think one issue that all these companies are facing is this topic of regulation. So, what are some of the hurdles that are coming for companies like Robinhood when it comes to regulation with prediction markets?
Yeah, currently there's this legal battle that's being played out between state regulators and prediction markets on the topic of whether prediction markets are allowed to offer sports contracts. And the state regulators are essentially alleging that prediction markets are offering unregistered sports gambling because state regulators are the ones who are issuing license to gambling platforms, and they generate tax revenue from these gambling revenue. But then prediction markets are arguing that they are currently regulated by a federal regulator called the CFTC, which has sided with prediction markets in asserting their jurisdiction over sports contracts. So this is a legal battle that's still being played out. It will potentially head to the Supreme Court, so it will take a while before this legal uncertainty gets resolved.
Gotcha. Sounds like, a lot more coming in the upcoming months around this topic. Again, thank you so much for joining me, Yueqi. And that is Yueqi Yang, our crypto reporter here at The Information. So that does it for today's show. A reminder that we are on the stream Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. If you can't make it then, episodes are available on theinformation.com, our YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to follow us on social media on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Hope everybody has a great rest of your Monday, and I will be back with you tomorrow.